have a dog at home who's found a squeaky toy. So who's following up behind me.
I have a dog as well. I have a German Shepherd. Her name is Cleo. So
you're a dog owner too, which has...
I'm a dog mom. And sometimes everyone needs mom sometimes, and that's okay. We figure it out.
Today's episode is a special one. As you may have heard me say in previous episodes, I am not aware of any other jurisdiction in the world doing what Ontario, Canada has been doing at a critical time in our response to meeting the needs of our aging population. Ontario is reforming primary care, home and community care, mental health care, and long-term care, investing billions and billions of dollars and introducing dramatic changes in how we deliver those care models. Our conversation today is about care, where it begins, how it's sustained, and how it shapes the choices we make together as leaders, as systems, and as communities. And it's a real privilege to spend this time with someone who carries that responsibility every single day. I'm honored to welcome the Honourable Natalia Kusendova-Bashta, Ontario's Minister of Long-Term Care, a registered nurse whose frontline experience continues to ground her leadership and a trusted steward of one of the most important files in our health system. Before entering public office, Minister Kusendova-Bashta spent years at the bedside, caring for patients and families in moments that demanded compassion, clarity, and trust. That perspective matters, and we see that perspective reflected today in the work underway to rebuild long-term care, expand capacity, and strengthen the care teams Ontarians rely on every day. This conversation goes beyond policy and portfolios. It's about leadership shaped by experience. It's about responsibility carried with purpose. And it's about what becomes possible when care is not treated as a silo, but as a shared commitment across government, across the health system, and across our communities. At its heart, this episode reminds us that care is not just something we deliver. It's how we lead change together. And it's a privilege to explore that change together. So, Minister Kusendova-Bashta, I have to say, it is such a privilege to have you on our podcast. You are our first politician whom we've invited. We don't do that lightly, but we really felt that it was really important at this moment in time, as we think about innovation and leadership, and women leading in healthcare and in politics, to take an opportunity to really tap into who you are and what's inspiring you. So today we wanted to get to know you a little better, to share who you are as a person, what's motivating you and driving you in leading, I think, relentlessly, if I can use that word, the changes that we're seeing in Ontario.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me today. It's an honor to be here and spend this time together and discuss issues that are so important to Ontarians. Aging with grace, aging with dignity, and aging being well supported.
You've got a background in human and molecular biology, and then you became a nurse. And I'm always inspired by nurses. I come from a family of my grandmother became a nursing sister in the Second World War in a field hospital, actually caring for Canadians. So when you think back to the beginning, you did your science background, but what called you to nursing?
When I finished my first degree in human molecular biology, I didn't network very well within my field at the time. I was pretty young and I didn't really have a mentor. And so I couldn't really get a job in my field. So I ended up working in a tech company, Samsung Electronics. I was the receptionist there for a large corporation, 500 employees. I speak French, and so they hired me also for that skill because 25% of their customers come from Quebec. And so I worked there for 2 years. That was my first sort of grown-up job, full-time job, first time making a full-time income. So it was good in a way. But in the other way, I realized that I don't want to work in front of a computer. I really want to work with people. I always had a passion for medicine and healthcare. My father, he's a physician. Unfortunately, he couldn't work in Canada. He tried for 2 years when we first moved to Canada when I was a young child, 12 years old at the time. And so he left. Inspired by him and also my grandparents, who my grandmother was a nurse and my grandfather was a physician, I always had a keen interest in healthcare. So after 2 years working at Samsung Electronics, I was just sitting there one day at reception and I just decided to Google nursing. And so I Googled different nursing degrees. And because I already had a degree in science, I didn't want to do the traditional 4-year program. So I ended up applying for an accelerated bachelor's. It was called the Scholar Practitioner Program, which was at the time being offered at Nipissing University, but remotely. All of the courses and all of the placements were done in Toronto. And so I applied and I got in. And so I was very excited because I really wanted to get into a profession in which I can use skills. Like I can be hands-on and I can develop real life skills that don't involve just sitting in front of a computer and sending emails and making appointments, but also skills that won't be easily replaced and one that I can really dedicate my life to the service of others. I always knew I wanted to help others and lead with compassion, and sort of the nursing degree really lent itself very well. And so, but I have to say, that degree was very intense. It was 2 years, but it was 6 semesters. So we didn't have a summer break. I think it was 1,500 nursing student hours, which at the time were not remunerated. And so it was really intense because to learn the entire body of knowledge of nursing in 2 years, it took real commitment and dedication. I was exposed to different environments in my placements, mostly at University Health Network. I actually did not get a practicum in long-term care, but I was at a rehabilitation center. So there were some similarities. And then I graduated and all of a sudden, lo and behold, I was working in Etobicoke General Hospital in the ER as a brand new nurse, learning every day. Of course, the job was stressful at the beginning, right? Because it's a lot. And we're literally charged with taking care of people's lives. And especially in the emergency room, patients can turn very quickly. And so really being astute to those warning signs and making sure to ask for help. As new nurses, we're all a little bit shy, but knowing when to go to ask for help was one of the key things that I learned. And then I learned how to work well within a team, right? In the emergency room, we're always surrounded with other allied health professionals. We work as a team. I would say I learned a lot during my time at Etobicoke General Hospital. And to this day, I maintain my nursing license and I still maintain my employment status with William Osler as a casual staff nurse. When I'm in the hospital, I'm a nurse and I work with my colleagues. I ask questions because I don't practice often enough. Often I do need support of other nurses to answer clinical questions. But everyone is very respectful and I'm part of a team. And I just enjoy those experiences so much because they keep me grounded. I'm able to see the impact of the work that we're doing in the front lines, but also, again, connect with patients and hear their stories. And there are so many stories to hear. And then I always get some kind of idea, how we can improve process even better. Last time I was there, I was actually able to fill out the health assessment that a hospital can fill out for admission or to begin the process of admission into long-term care. So that was very interesting to be able to actually see what that looks like, how long it takes to do the patient interview. It's a good opportunity and I enjoy it. I'm not there every day. I'm sure being an everyday bedside nurse is not easy. So when I'm there, I love it.
And I can see your skills really coming to life, thinking about those different parts of the system. And one thing I find really commendable for you is also thinking about whether it's deliberate or just more intuitive, how your insights from having been on the front line have really informed and shaped your sense of how do you foster trust?
Well, I would say once a nurse, always a nurse. It's something that never leaves you. And in most of my interactions, whether it's even in my MPP office, when constituents come in with all kinds of problems, social problems, life problems, having the experience of being a nurse, helps tremendously. A lot of transferable skills, active listening, problem solving, critical thinking, prioritization. But obviously, including in my role as Minister of Long-Term Care, because the clinical background and my knowledge just helps me have a really thorough understanding of the issues and the challenges. And even today, I went for a tour of a long-term care home, and they demoed a community paramedicine plus program through which community paramedics come in to support with certain diagnostics. They come to support the nurses working in long-term care. I was able to have a real conversation about what the patients, the residents are benefiting from this program, what are other needs, training needs, etc. So I think specific to this role, it's very beneficial, but also in other roles and in life, even taking care of my own son, definitely being a nurse also helps me. I think becoming a nurse was the best decision that I've made for my life.
Well, I remember your first day as Minister of Long-Term Care. You spent the day in a long-term care home with nurses, and you were following nurses and learning from them firsthand and taking your own lens. Nursing, I get that sense it is a calling for you. I have to say, one of the greatest gifts was being able to follow you just before the holidays on a tour of a long-term care home and see the level of engagement and connectivity that you have with residents and families, and taking that time to pause and making them feel seen and heard. And you do have a magic touch. I'm curious, from that calling in nursing, what called you to politics?
I remember just coming home from maybe I was a nurse for a year by now and still learning, still novice. At Etobicoke General at the time, they had an old emergency room. It was very small, very congested. Of course, we had I think like 20 hallway beds, hallway 1, hallway 2. And usually as a new nurse, we would be assigned the dreaded hallway shift. And so if you spend 12, and it's never 12, it's usually 13 and sometimes plus, because as a new nurse, I'm always catching up on my documentation after a shift. So if you spend 13 hours working in a hallway and you don't see the daylight, you come in, it's dark, and you leave, it's dark. And anytime you sit down on your little tiny table to document with like your patients lined up right in front of you, their feet literally in front of you, and every moment someone is bumping into you because there's a cart coming by, someone's going to x-ray, some equipment's being wheeled in. I just remember one day coming in and from a shift like that, putting my feet up and thinking to myself, is this really what our healthcare system looks like? Is this really the best that we can do? It was very demoralizing, my beginning. And I thought to myself, can I actually do this? Is this really what being a nurse in Ontario looks like? And so I started looking actually at our political structure. I started looking at the Ministry of Health. I started looking at how we spend our healthcare dollars. I started talking to more senior colleagues, nurses who have been in the profession 20, 30, 40 years. And a lot of them were very jaded. And I had this moment where I thought, you know what? I don't want to spend my life doing something that's very challenging without actually trying to solve the issue, without trying to offer a solution, without trying to improve. So I decided that, I know it sounds I was very young and I don't know, but I decided that I want to be part of a positive change, to be part of a healthcare transformation in Ontario, because I knew that we can do better. And yes, I had conservative values just stemming from my family and always personal responsibility. We were immigrants to this country, very grateful for everything this country had to offer. And so I made the leap and decided to run for a nomination. We kind of knew that the Liberal government at the time is very likely outgoing. We knew the sentiments. And so I thought this is a good opportunity for me to get involved and to actually, I know it sounds very cliche now, but to be the change that you want to see in the world. And I also thought that politics needs more nurses. If we want to have better healthcare policy, well, then we need clinicians involved in creating those policies, right? So I thought I was well positioned to be part of that change. And that's why I took my leap into politics and really to try to end hallway healthcare in Ontario. That was like the main thing I talked about at the doors when I ran back in 2018. And literally every single person at the door could relate to that. Everyone had a story about a loved one or themselves being stuck in a hallway in a stretcher. for hours or days. And so it was very relatable. People trust nurses. So I was very fortunate. The stars aligned and I was elected as a 28-year-old in 2018, new nurse, and I became an MPP.
So it's been 8 years since you've been an MPP. And last year, you welcomed Matthew, your son, so just over a year ago. So you are an MPP, a cabinet minister, a nurse, and a mom.
And a wife. Let's not forget.
And a wife and a daughter. Those are a lot of hats that you wear. And I'm curious, how do you balance that, especially as a change agent? And you really are an agent of change. You are not about the if, it's always the how. The how and who do you need to bring along and mobilize to get it done. I can only assume you're like that in all aspects of your life, but that's a lot to balance. So how do you juggle?
I'm a firm believer that God doesn't give you more than you can handle. And my faith is a huge source of strength for me. And I really feel a calling. If God put me in this position and he gave me the most beautiful gift of my son, Matthew, but at the same time, literally it was weeks apart where I found out I was pregnant and then I became minister. But at the same time, gave me this calling to help 80,000 people who live in long-term care and be a leader for 120,000 staff. I know that I can do it because God will give me the strength to make sure that I achieve everything that's needed. But in the day-to-day life, just like a nurse, I prioritize whatever needs my immediate attention. And I say sometimes to my team too, let's put this in the parking lot, right? So if I need to put something in the parking lot, I do, and then come back to it. But I love my job. I love my family. I have so many blessings in my life. And so I just take it one day at a time. One day at a time, prioritize. I try to also lead by example. So I set high standards for myself, but I also have high expectations from my team. But the only way you can do that is if you meet those same standards or meet those same expectations. So I have to have a very strong work ethic because I can't expect the rest of my team to buy in and work hard if I'm not working hard. And so I was very proud that in the first year of being minister, I visited over 100 homes, or together with announcement, it was 65 homes and 35 announcements. So I had 100 engagements in my first year while also being pregnant. And also we had a break for the campaign.
You did throw in an extra election campaign in there after having had a baby and getting reelected and then coming back again to return as Minister of Long-Term Care. That's a lot.
It was. So that wasn't the plan. When I had Matthew, I had hoped to take about 4 months off. But of course, the election was called early. And so I had no choice but to run the campaign. And in the similar vein, I couldn't expect my team to go out there in minus 15 and door knock for me if I wasn't willing to do the same. And so I had a C-section, and normally recovery is 6 weeks. But there I was 3 weeks later, door knocking, minus 15. And asking people to trust me again with their vote. And then Premier gave me another privilege of serving again as Minister of Long-Term Care. So I'm very grateful.
When I speak to my colleagues through the Global Aging Network, many of whom have been on the podcast, or with my colleagues across Canada, in the media, we hear a lot about, we need to look to Denmark or we need to look to the Netherlands. But in speaking with those other colleagues, it's really clear to me that we have a huge opportunity to better tell the story of Ontario. And based on my conversations, I'm not aware of any jurisdiction in the world who is doing as much as Ontario is to transform healthcare more broadly and seniors' care to the extent that this government, and under Premier Ford and with your leadership, and Minister Jones' leadership and others around the cabinet table, to sustained investments of billions and billions of dollars to transform the health system. So investments in primary care, home and community care, mental health care, and most especially long-term care, and doing more to be better prepared for our aging population. You've been in office for 8 years. You're on your second tour post-election as Minister of Long-Term Care. So for what are you most proud of in terms of your tenure and the change, the constant transformation that you are driving that moves us from typical to actually quite extraordinary?
Well, first and foremost, I'm most proud of our people. The Premier says it all the time, but our greatest asset is in Ontario are our people. And when I go and I visit the long-term care homes, every single time I am reaffirmed in the strong belief that we have the best people here in Ontario. People that work in long-term care, it's not an easy job. It's 100% a calling. They're very special people and they need to be recognized. And so I'm starting to shift that narrative that previously long-term care, especially during the pandemic, we had a little bit of a bad reputation, not deserved by the operators or the people themselves, but the circumstances that Ontario and many other jurisdictions found themselves in. But unfortunately, those that work in long-term care, they felt that personally, that very bad stigma attached to long-term care and people being afraid of putting their loved ones in long-term care. But I do believe now, years later, we have shifted that narrative. People are proud to say that they work in long-term care. We have provided many opportunities for people to bridge their career ladder, whether it's an RSP, resident support person, becoming a PSW becoming an RPN, RPM to RN. I'm currently working RN to NP. Stay tuned. I really want people to feel that long-term care is a long-term career. They can start, they can move up, they can have many different roles within long-term. But I think my most proud moment to date would be when I was able to announce a nursing expansion at our colleges and universities. I stood together with Minister Jones and Minister Quinn, and I felt like all of my worlds are colliding. I invited my professors from nursing school. I invited the nursing associations, some of my mentors, and of course, my political colleagues. And to be able to fund, as Minister of Long-Term Care, the expansion of 2,200 more nursing seats in the province of Ontario, I think that was such a proud moment. And I got to speak about what does it mean for me to be a registered nurse? What does that title mean to me? And speak to the future nurses that what profession it is that they're joining. This club of camaraderie, support, and just an amazing profession where sky's the limit. And I truly believe when I say that nursing profession can open up so many different career pathways for people, including to become a politician, right? And so sky truly is the limit. And so I think that was my proudest moment to date, to be able to fund and commit to expanding nursing student seats in the province of Ontario.
Well, and it's so exciting. So you're going to be able to look back and think of 4, 5, 10 years from now, those nurses, you can say, I was part of you becoming a nurse. I made that possible. But at the same time, I think there's such a great story to be told around what is that going to mean for the people on the ground who need care, whether that's in home and community care, acute care, primary care, or in long-term care, or even how those nurses are going to work in different team-based approaches with more integrated approaches to care, including one thing that you're really championing right now, which is community outreach or community access to long-term care, where maybe those nurses are also helping somebody in the community.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. The community access to long-term care pilot program is one of my favorite because, again, during the pandemic, long-term care homes became very closed in on themselves. Very few people in, very few people out. A lot of seniors who, especially living with dementia, didn't understand why their loved ones all of a sudden can be coming in. It was a very tough situation. But now I want to flip that upside down and really open up our long-term care homes to become hubs of activity for seniors living in the area to come in, to be able to share a meal together, to be able to get assistance with a shower if they require, to be able to get podiatry services. We know how important that is for seniors. My vision for the future is for all or many of our long-term care homes to have such a program to really welcome seniors in the area, because seniors, when we say aging in place for seniors, as much as that's important and good, a lot of these seniors are aging in isolation and they don't have a social safety network, or they might not have family, or they might not speak English, right? So to be able to provide some socialization and some clinical services to seniors living in the area of a long-term care home, I think that's a beautiful project, and I really do hope that Treasury Board will approve our expansion of it in future years.
Certainly among our members, see a huge opportunity at our rural communities as well. But you've also touched on someone, we have so many people in Canada who don't speak English necessarily. It's not their first language. And as we age, we know many people with dementia may default to their mother tongue. At OLTCA, we've been talking about aging in place, meaning aging in the context of your community. So whether that's geographic, whether that's a neighborhood, whether that's faith, linguistic community, or a cultural community. And I'm curious, you've been a RIB proponent as well. You speak 5 languages, so that English, French, Polish, Czech, and Slovak. Have I got that right?
Yes, that's right.
All fluently.
Slovak, I don't have that many opportunities anymore, so it's becoming a little bit rusty. But the other 4, yes, I would say fluently.
Wow, what a gift, because it gives you a real lens into those communities as well. And to that point, one of the other areas of interest that you have is in trying to solve for how do we better support our cultural homes or language-specific or faith-based homes. Could you speak a bit about that? Because I think our listeners would be really interested within the Canadian context. What does that look like? And what are some of the challenges we're having to navigate? And any thoughts you have on how we can together find solutions on that?
Yes, absolutely. So I always say that diversity is our strength, and that our cultural homes, and we have about 75 of them, are the jewels in my long-term care crown. We are very special that we're able to have these cultural homes, and we're building more. And I'll tell you, this past weekend, I actually went caroling with a group of singers and musicians to our Polish long-term care home. And we went from floor to floor, and we were singing Polish carols. And I can tell you, some of the seniors sitting in the common room, they were sleeping, and then they woke up, and I started to see their lips moving, and they started to sing. And some of them even started crying. And for me, that means everything. For them to be able to hear the carols in their own language, to go back maybe to their childhood or to their memories. Seniors who have dementia and maybe haven't interacted in any way in a long time. I had one lady who's used to be a dancer actually stand up from her walker and start dancing. So like that moment and these it tells me everything that I need to know. The cultural care is absolutely necessary, needed. And again, when we talk about dignity, this is what it means, is to provide those opportunities as much as we can. Of course, being so diverse also has its challenges. So we might not always have the appropriate workforce that would speak those languages. But one of the things that I'm currently thinking about when I went on a recent tour of the home in Toronto, they have a Portuguese floor and the staff don't speak Portuguese, but they were taking Duolingo and some of them started speaking a few sentences, few words. So it got me thinking, why can't the ministry fund some language training courses for staff who would be interested? I mean, we fund all kinds of educational opportunities. What prevents us from funding a college level language course? It would support our colleges and universities, and it would support our staff. So if I don't go on these tours and be present in these interactions, then I wouldn't know these things. So that's where I get my best ideas. They don't come from me. They come from our people, which is our greatest asset, as I've said. So absolutely, cultural care is a top priority. Of course, we have some challenges around placement because we always have to be mindful about people with the highest acuity and the highest needs being able to be placed in long-term care first. But at the same time, we do have to provide some solutions to ensure that the homes that are built by these communities that have a cultural character, that they're community fundraised, came together. And it's not easy to build a long-term care home. So if there is a cultural community that came together and jumped through all the hoops and opened up a long-term care home, that we need to ensure that the character of that home is maintained and sustained. And so I'm currently working through some policy decisions. It's not easy, right? Because there is a lot of conflicting priorities, moving ALC patients out of hospitals into long-term care. But I have a good team and I have great advisors, including yourself. And so I'm ready for the challenge.
Well, we're certainly committed to working with you. We know from some polling that we did over the summer, individuals want to stay in their communities. They want access to their community supports. They have different definitions of community. And in many cases, it really is their cultural community or their faith-based community. And so how can we work together to ensure that we're going to be able to meet their expectations and ensure those supports are in place? I did want to touch as well on another area of great leadership that you've been involved in, dementia care. And I know that dementia care has been a priority for you, including doing something that is almost nearly impossible in legislatures around the world, which is passing private members' legislation. So when you were a private member, you brought in a bill on improving dementia care. That legislation has passed in Ontario, Canada. So I'm curious, what drew you to dementia care even before there was an idea that you might become the Minister of Long-Term Care in the province of Ontario?
It's the stories of the people that I met in my journey and in my work as MPP and as a nurse, and even seeing for myself, even in the ED, people living with dementia and coming into the ED because their family didn't know what else to do. And so realizing that our system of supports for people living with dementia is very fragmented. It's very difficult to navigate. A diagnosis is devastating for the individual, but it's also very difficult for the family as well. And so I realized that we need to do better, simply speaking. And so I started working and speaking with different stakeholders, including Alzheimer's Society of Ontario. They were a great source of information. And in the 22 campaign, which was also before I became minister, when I was door knocking, I was surprised how many people told me about loved ones living with dementia, either at home, in a community setting, or even in long-term care. It was a very frequent conversation I was having with people. There was a poll which said that 95% of voters agree that the government of Ontario needs to do more to support people living with dementia. And you and I both know that voters don't agree on mostly anything these days, right? So for 95% people to agree that the government needs to do more, it means that we really must. And so after I won the second election in 22, I took that on as an issue to champion, and I partnered with MPP Laura Smith, who has the lived experience of being a caregiver for two people living with dementia, one her aunt and another individual in the family as well. And so myself, I had the medical background and MPP Smith had the caregiver background. And together we sort of became the voice within government for people living with dementia. And we tabled the bill together and we did a lot of heavy lifting. We organized several lunch and learns. It was called Destigmatizing Dementia, because we realized how much stigma there's attached to dementia. And so we traveled across Ontario in different regions and we hosted these lunch and learns. And you'd be surprised. There were invited stakeholders from all sorts of organizations, music therapy, colleges, PSWs, Alzheimer's societies. You'd be surprised how many people were meeting themselves for the first time at our lunch and learns, that they didn't know about these other organizations that are in this space. So that advocacy was highly successful and it helped us really to pass the bill. We had a lot of petitions signed in favor of our bill and a lot of work with the Ministry of Health as well, because as the legislation, the language has to be very precise. And so a lot of back and forth negotiation about what can be in the legislation, what cannot be, because once it's passed, it's law, right? So there's no turning back. So it has to be perfect. But lo and behold, we passed the Improving Dementia Care in Ontario Act.
Well, congratulations, because it does take all parties' support too. So building those bridges, getting the support, it's a lot of work. So I want to thank you and MPP Smith for that. It really matters. And I think really aligns well with the work you're leading within the ministry. One of the struggles we've been having with some of the perception that everyone is going to age at home. And one of the challenges, and one of the reasons I think we had some of the challenges during the pandemic is that previous governments said, no, everyone wants to age in their own home. And so we are just going to focus on home care and we're going to keep everybody in their family homes. And so there's this thought that we don't need to build new long-term care homes. We don't need to rebuild those old long-term care homes. That is not the path forward. Yet Premier Ford, even before he was first elected, one of his signature commitments was to build and rebuild 58,000 long-term care spaces. And so I'm curious as to your thoughts. The government has been steadfast behind this commitment, made historical progress in rebuilding those old ward rooms and ward homes, and it is historic. From your perspective, one, why is it important that we continue to build and rebuild? And why is it so important right now?
So absolutely. This was one of our campaign platform promises back in 2018, our commitment to long-term care redevelopment. And it continues to be. It was in the throne speech after our election this past year. You and I both know not everything makes it into the throne speech. So for it to be in the throne speech, that gives you a very strong indication that this is a government priority. And why is it important? Well, we have an aging population. People have more complex healthcare needs. People live longer. And the reality is that families are not always equipped to care for the needs of their loved ones. Maybe even if they have the physical space, which we do have a housing crisis in Ontario as well. And these large family homes, at one point, one single senior living in a large family home might not be the ideal solution, and the homes might not even be suitable and accessible for the needs of that senior. And so there's that saying by Mahatma Gandhi, which is a true measure of any society is how it takes care of its vulnerable. And so I don't think the right approach is to just shift the responsibility on families and caregivers with some home care supports. Sure, that works in certain circumstances for certain families, but not for all. So we do need to make sure we have spaces available for seniors should the time come that they need long-term care, that they need higher level of care. And so what I think the previous Liberal government did wrong is that, yes, they invested in home care, but they should have done both, which is what we're doing. They should have invested in home care and in long-term care. And I do think as well, as a member of the younger generation, I look at the baby boomers and I said, what did you guys do to prepare for your own aging? So that leadership from that previous government was really lacking on that, because we studied the demographics. We know when the boomers are aging, and we knew well in advance when these care needs will present themselves. So as much as we are investing heavily, billions of dollars, the most generous capital funding program there is probably in the world,
Absolutely. I agree.
We are behind because we can't make up for 15 years of non-building. And don't forget, we lost 3 full construction years as a result of the pandemic. And we couldn't have predicted that either. And so we are committed to building. And I was in the office yesterday. I signed off on a lot of new development agreements. And my team and I were even joking around. And I said, how much money did I just spend? And they're like, over $1 billion. And that is not a joke, because some of these projects cost $235 million. The government is committing to fund $235 million for one project in the GTA. I don't think any government, federal or provincial, in the history of our country has done more for seniors and for long-term care than we are currently doing.
And for us, it's deeply personal for me. So as somebody who was a family caregiver to both my parents, but my father did move into long-term care with end-stage Alzheimer's over 20 years ago. He lived and passed away in long-term care. And we were able to care for my dad at home until we couldn't. And when we couldn't, it happened really quickly. And so I think we are seeing that today, where we have wait lists. And so it is putting a burden on family caregivers, and they're doing their best at home. Our data would show, Minister, of people over the age of 80, just 20% are going to need more specialized care. 80% won't, which is wonderful. But how do we support those 20%, recognizing that if we don't support them appropriately with more specialized supports when they should need it, it will have a burden on those family caregivers. I'm wondering, what do you wish more Ontarians understood about long-term care and about the people who live and work in homes across the province? You've touched on at the beginning around the people side, but you've also kind of alluded to a bit of that stigma or mystery or fear of it.
I think, frankly, there's a role for the media to play. Because the reality is, if we only tell the bad stories when something bad happens, and just like in any profession, every once in a while, there will be something that happens that is not so good. But if we only hear the bad stories, but we don't hear all the good things that we're doing, then the public will have a very skewed perception of long-term care. And that's why the public might be apprehensive of putting their loved one in long-term care. And those decisions are not easy to begin with, right? Lots of family dynamics at play, lots of cultural differences. In some cultures, it is not even acceptable to put a loved one in a long-term care home. So what I wish is that we all collectively, those of us who work in long-term care, those of us involved, that we start sharing the good stories about long-term care. Like, for example, if there is a spousal reunification that happens in a long-term care home, let's celebrate it. Let's invite maybe the media. Let's talk about the story of those two spouses not being together and then through our program being reunited in long-term care. I know for a fact we've reunited over 500 spouses last year. I know that. And so I think it's incumbent on all of us that have a vested interest in this, that work in long-term care, long-term carers, that we start sharing these positive stories. And I'm trying to do my best that I can, including coming on this podcast and other opportunities. But I think we all need to start talking about long-term care in a positive light. If you're a nurse working in long-term care, invite your friends, apply for a job. By the way, there's a $25,000 incentive. If you're a nurse from outside of the sector coming into long-term care, you can get a $25,000 bonus. Isn't that great? We should be talking about these opportunities, including about our Begin program where we can train and ladder. So that's really my wish, and that's my focus. Shifting the narrative, celebrating. The word celebrating. Let's celebrate long-term care. I think we fixed it. I think it's time to celebrate it. So stay tuned for some hopefully changes, wink, wink, on that one.
One of the other things that you've really led and spearheaded too is making long-term care homes centers of learning and continuous learning through embedding living classrooms, through extern programs where nursing students can come in and learn. And so we're exposing it to a new generation of student and that active living and the earn and work opportunities. This is not long-term care of 2020. This is Ontario's new long-term care of 2026. And it is something to celebrate. And when you walk into a new home, it does not feel like like the stereotypical long-term care home. So we want to thank you too, Minister, for your support of our Long-Term Care Community Engagement Day, where homes across the province of Ontario and Canada invite everybody in. Come elected officials, community partners, to actually meet the people who work and live in a long-term care home and see that this is a place of work, it is a place of learning, it is a place of caring, and it is really part of community. So it's through your leadership that's been possible. And we're certainly committed, including through discussions like this, to sharing that story. On a closing note, if maybe you could leave us with a comment about what is giving you hope today.
Our seniors, our amazing seniors give me hope. I mentioned the story of Copernicus Lodge and the seniors singing the carols, and they reminded me of my very own grandmother who lives in Poland. And I've met so many amazing seniors that shared their life stories with me. They shared about their children and grandchildren. They proudly have decorations and beautiful photographs in their room, and they each have an amazing story to tell. They have built our country, our province. They've sacrificed, they worked hard, they paid their taxes. And so I'm inspired by each and every one of those stories. But at the same time, I feel responsible for these seniors. I feel like there are 80,000 seniors in my care as a nurse. So I feel a really deep commitment and just I need to make sure that every single home in Ontario is a dignified place, that I would be comfortable placing my own grandmother, if she were here, there. Really, it's our seniors that inspire me. And of course, as I mentioned before, our amazing healthcare workers and long-term care workers, everybody, whether it's the janitor, the dietary aide, the volunteers, the technical support. Because we always talk about healthcare staff, but what about everybody else who works in long-term care? I was able to shadow some PSWs a couple of weeks ago, and I spoke to the dietary aides we were actually serving lunch. And so those dietary aides, they knew every single senior, how they like their coffee. They like to take their ketchup on the side. This one doesn't eat carrots. Like, they knew their seniors by heart, because they love their seniors. And so we have some amazing people that work in long-term care. I'm so proud of each and every one of them. And it's these people and these interactions that really give me hope, because when I walk into a long-term care home and when I leave, I know that there's amazing people that work there. And so that's what gives me hope.
Well, thank you for sharing, Minister Kusendova-Bashta. It's such a privilege to have had the opportunity to speak with you today, to be able to share all of the extraordinary stuff that is actually happening in Ontario, Canada. To your point, it is time that we celebrate all the extraordinary innovation that is actually happening here. And we don't need to look to other countries, should be looking to Ontario. And so thank you for joining us and for your inspiration.
Thank you so much, Donna, and thank you for your leadership, and to your entire board as well. Always great ideas. And I do need those ideas, because it truly takes a village. So thank you for that.
It's a delight to work with you. Thank you so much. This episode was generously sponsored by our sector champions, our partners who support our advocacy work and share our commitment to strengthening long-term care in Ontario. Their support helps advance meaningful conversations like the one you heard today.